I learned the hard way that keeping your house warm in January could cost you $200 when Patricia Summers knocked on my door holding a citation with my address on it. The cold snap had hit Denver hard that winter, with temperatures dropping to -15 degrees Fahrenheit for 3 straight weeks. I had been running my heater constantly, like every other sane person in the neighborhood, when Patricia showed up with her clipboard and that expression she always wore, the one that said she had caught someone breaking a rule and was enjoying every second of it. She handed me the paper without any greeting, just thrust it toward my chest like she was serving a warrant. "Zachary Henderson, you are in violation of HOA Regulation 14.6 subsection B, she announced, her breath forming clouds in the freezing air. Excessive energy consumption during restricted hours. I stood there in my doorway, my fleece jacket doing nothing against the wind, staring at the fine. $200 for running my heater between midnight and 6 in the morning. I read it 3 times before looking up at her. "You are fining me for keeping my house warm," I asked, keeping my voice level despite the anger building in my chest. "The rules clearly state that energy consumption must be minimized during peak rate hours to keep community utility costs down," Patricia said, adjusting her scarf. She was probably in her late 40s, with blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, and she wore her HOA board president badge on her coat like a police detective showing off their shield. "Several neighbors have complained about increased utility costs, and we traced excessive heating usage back to your unit." "How exactly did you trace anything back to my unit?" I asked. "That is private utility information." "The HOA has access to aggregate data from the community meters," she replied smoothly. "We can identify patterns of excessive use. You signed the agreement when you purchased your townhome." I had signed that agreement 3 years ago when I bought the place, fresh out of college with my first real job as a software engineer. Back then, I had been so excited about homeownership that I barely read the HOA documents beyond the monthly fee amount. That had been my first mistake. My second mistake was not anticipating that Patricia Summers would take over as HOA president and turn our quiet community into her personal fiefdom. "I am not paying this," I said, handing the paper back to her. She did not take it. "Then we will place a lien on your property." "The HOA bylaws give us that authority. You have 30 days to pay or appeal to the board." She turned and walked back down my steps, her boots crunching on the ice that had formed overnight. I went back inside and cranked the heater up out of spite. The Meadowbrook Commons community consisted of 48 townhomes arranged in a horseshoe pattern around a central green space. In summer, it was actually pleasant, with trees providing shade and a small playground where neighborhood kids played. In winter, it looked like a frozen wasteland, and the community building at the center of the horseshoe served as the HOA meeting room, a gym that nobody used, and a small library with donated books nobody read. That community building was heated by a commercial system that I had installed 2 years ago. This was the detail Patricia had apparently forgotten or never known. When I bought my townhome, I had been working a second job on weekends doing HVAC work to help pay down my student loans. The previous heating system in the community building had died in December 3 years back, and the HOA had been scrambling to find someone to replace it before the annual holiday party. I had volunteered, ordering the equipment at cost and installing it myself in exchange for 6 months of waived HOA fees. The board at the time had been thrilled with the arrangement. What they did not know, what nobody had bothered to ask, was that I had installed a system that required a specific startup sequence and maintenance schedule that only I knew. I had documented everything, of course, put it all in a binder that I handed to the then president, Martin Crosby. Martin had been a decent guy, retired military, ran things efficiently but fairly. He had thanked me profusely and stuck the binder on a shelf in the community building office. Then Martin moved to Florida to be near his daughter, and Patricia Summers got herself elected by promising to enhance property values through strict compliance and community standards. What that actually meant was she drove around looking for violations like a traffic cop trying to meet a quota. Dead plant in a window box in February, $50 fine. Christmas lights still up on January 3rd, $100. Kids playing basketball making noise after 8 at night, citation for noise violations. I had mostly avoided her attention until now, keeping my head down and my property in compliance. But this heating fine was different. This was her fining me for trying not to freeze to death in my own home. I spent the next 2 days researching the HOA bylaws and Colorado state law regarding homeowner associations. Turned out Patricia was technically correct, which was the worst kind of correct. The energy consumption rule had been on the books for years, though never enforced. Colorado law gave HOAs broad authority to levy fines for rule violations, and while I could appeal, the appeal would be heard by the very board that Patricia controlled with 3 of her friends. On day 3, I received a reminder notice about the upcoming monthly HOA meeting, scheduled for the following Monday evening at 7. The temperature was supposed to drop to -20 that night. I looked at the notice, then at the heating fine still sitting on my kitchen counter, and made a decision. Monday morning, I called in sick to work. I drove to the community building and let myself in with the master key I had kept from when I did the installation. The heating system sat in a mechanical room at the back of the building, humming along efficiently. I had built in a remote monitoring system that connected to an app on my phone, something I had done for all my HVAC jobs, so I could troubleshoot problems without driving across town. The system had 3 modes: automatic, which maintained a steady 70 degrees, economy, which kept things at 60 and off. I opened the app and created a 4th mode, one I labeled manual override. This mode would turn the heat off completely, but make it look like the system was still running normally. Anyone checking the thermostat would see it set to 70 degrees and assume everything was fine. The system would just quietly not produce any heat. I set the override to activate at 6 that evening, 1 hour before the meeting. Then I went home and waited. At 6:30, my phone started ringing. I did not recognize the number, so I let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, it rang again. Same number. I ignored it. At 6:45, someone knocked on my door hard enough to rattle the frame. Patricia stood on my steps again, but this time she was shivering, her face red from cold and anger. "The heat is not working in the community building," she said without preamble. "You installed it. Come fix it right now." "I am not an HVAC technician anymore," I said calmly. "I just did that as a favor years ago. You should call a professional service." "The meeting starts in 15 minutes, she snapped. "We have 20 people coming. You need to fix it now." Like I said, I am not a technician. I would not even know where to start. I gave her my most apologetic smile. "Good luck with the meeting, though. Might want to tell people to bring blankets." Her face went from red to purple. "You did this deliberately." "I did what deliberately?" "The system is probably just malfunctioning. These things happen, especially in extreme cold. You really should have had regular maintenance done. When was the last time someone serviced it?" She opened her mouth, closed it, then turned and stalked away. I watched her pull out her phone as she walked, presumably calling emergency HVAC services. Good luck with that on a Monday night in January during a cold snap. Most companies had a 3 to 5 day wait time, and emergency calls cost triple. I closed my door and turned my heater up to 75. The next morning, I found a nasty note taped to my door informing me that the HOA meeting had been postponed due to facility issues, and that I was strongly suspected of sabotage. There was no fine attached this time, probably because Patricia could not prove anything. I went to work and put the whole thing out of my mind. My actual job kept me busy enough without worrying about HOA drama. I was working on a major software update that was due in 3 weeks, and my team was behind schedule. Wednesday afternoon, I got a certified letter. The HOA was billing me for emergency HVAC service in the amount of $850. According to the letter, a technician had come out Tuesday morning and found that the system had been deliberately disabled through unauthorized access to the control panel. They were also fining me an additional $500 for unauthorized entry to community facilities and willful destruction of community property. $1,350 total. For a $200 heating fine that was complete nonsense to begin with, I called my lawyer. His name was David Park, and we had gone to college together. He had gotten into real estate law and handled property disputes for a living. I explained the situation over the phone, sent him photos of all the notices and fines, and he called me back 3 hours later. "They do not have a case," he said. "First, you had legitimate access to the building. You kept the key from when you did the installation and nobody ever asked for it back. That is not unauthorized entry. Second, they cannot prove you did anything to the system. Did you actually disable it?" "I adjusted some settings through an app that I created when I installed the system," I said carefully. "Did your contract with the HOA say anything about retaining access or control of the system after installation?" I thought back. There was no formal contract. It was just a verbal agreement. I installed the system. They waived my HOA fees for 6 months. I gave them a binder with all the documentation. "Did the documentation mention this app or your remote access capability?" "No," I admitted. "That was not part of the original scope." I added the monitoring system for my own convenience. David was quiet for a moment. "Okay, here is the situation. They are going to argue you sabotaged their heating system in retaliation for the fine. You are going to argue that you simply adjusted settings on a system that you created and maintained, and that you had every right to do so since they never formally took ownership of your remote access controls. The problem is, even if you win that argument, you look petty and vindictive." "They fined me for heating my home in winter," I said. "I know, and that fine is also probably unenforceable. Colorado has implied warranty of habitability rules that would override HOA energy restrictions when it comes to basic heating in extreme weather. You could have fought the original fine and won. Instead, you escalated. He was right, and I knew it. I had let my anger make the decision instead of thinking it through. So what do I do now?" I asked. "We fight everything." "I will draft a response challenging all the fines and threatening a counter lawsuit for harassment and attempting to enforce unenforceable rules. That usually gets HOAs to back down. They do not want to spend money on legal fees over petty disputes. But Zachary, you need to turn their heat back on." "Why should I?" "Because right now you have the moral high ground. They find you for something unreasonable. The moment you keep their building cold out of spite, you become the bad guy. Turn it back on, be the bigger person, and let me handle the legal pressure." I hated that he was right. "Fine, I will turn it back on. Today," he pressed. Right now, actually, before anyone else notices or they get more ammunition for their sabotage theory. I pulled up the app on my phone while we were still talking and disabled the manual override. Done. The heat is back on. Good. I will have a response letter ready by tomorrow. This is going to blow over, trust me. HOAs fold when they realize someone is actually going to fight back with lawyers. He was wrong about that last part. Thursday evening, I got a knock on my door around 8. This time it was not Patricia. It was a man I recognized from the neighborhood, Daniel Roth, who lived 3 doors down. He was in his 30s like me, worked in finance, generally kept to himself. "Hey, Zachary," he said, looking uncomfortable. "Can we talk for a minute?" I let him in, offering coffee that he declined. We sat in my living room, and he got straight to the point. "Patricia is on a warpath about you," he said. "She is calling an emergency board meeting for this Saturday to discuss your violations and potentially pursue legal action. She has also been going door to door telling everyone you sabotaged the community building and that you are a threat to property values. She is defaming me to the neighbors. Basically, yes. Look, I am not on the board and I think Patricia is out of control. A lot of us do. But she has 3 friends on that 5-person board who vote with her on everything. Martin used to keep her in check when he was president, but now she runs things like a dictator." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I am tired of it," Daniel said, his voice carrying an edge of frustration. "Last month she fined me for having a wreath on my door past January 6th. She said it violated the decorations policy. It was a plain green wreath with pine cones. Before that, she fined the Johnsons for their sons by being visible in their garage when the door was open. She has fined at least 20 of the 48 homes in the past 6 months. People are scared to do anything because they do not know what will set her off. So, what are you suggesting?" "There is another board election in 4 months. We need to get Patricia voted out, but nobody wants to run against her because she will make their life hell in retaliation. You are already in a fight with her. If you ran for president and won, you could fix this whole mess." I leaned back against the couch. "I am not a politician, Daniel. I just want to live in my house without getting insane fines. Think about it at least. Talk to some of the other neighbors. We need someone to stand up to her, and you have already shown you are willing to fight back." He stood to leave. "The emergency meeting is Saturday at 10 in the morning at the community building. You might want to be there." After he left, I sat in the silence of my living room, thinking. Running for HOA president sounded like a nightmare. I had bought this place specifically because I wanted a low-maintenance living situation. The HOA was supposed to handle landscaping and exterior maintenance, so I could focus on my job and my life. Instead, it had turned into a source of constant stress. My phone buzzed with an email from David. He had sent over his response letter to the HOA, and it was thorough. 5 pages of legal language that basically said the fines were unenforceable. The sabotage accusations were baseless and defamatory. And if they continued this harassment, I would file a lawsuit for violation of Colorado Fair Housing statutes and intentional infliction of emotional distress. He was asking them to withdraw all fines and issue a written apology within 10 business days. I approved it, and he sent it Friday morning via certified mail. Saturday morning was brutally cold again, -12 degrees with a wind that cut through every layer of clothing. I bundled up and walked to the community building at 9:45. The heat was working, thankfully, and the room was comfortably warm when I entered. Patricia sat at a table at the front of the room with her 4 board members: Susan Martinez, Todd Fleming, Brenda Walsh, and Robert Green. All 4 were in their 40s or 50s. All had been handpicked by Patricia for the board when positions opened up. About 15 other homeowners were scattered in chairs around the room. I recognized Daniel, the Johnsons with their teenage son, the elderly couple from the end unit, Mrs. Chen, who always walked her corgi in the mornings, and several others whose names I did not know. Patricia called the meeting to order at exactly 10. She did not waste time with pleasantries. "We are here to discuss the ongoing violations and hostile actions taken by Zachary Henderson," she began, looking directly at me. "Mr. Henderson has willfully violated energy consumption policies, sabotaged community property, and made unauthorized entry into the community building. The board is considering a vote to impose additional fines and possibly pursue a restraining order preventing him from accessing community facilities." "That is a lie," I said loudly, standing up. "You fine me for heating my home in sub-zero temperatures, which is an unenforceable violation of Colorado habitability laws. I have consulted with an attorney, and every fine you have issued is legally questionable at best." "You disabled the heating system in this building," Susan Martinez said, speaking for the first time. She was a thin woman with dark hair and wire-rimmed glasses. "We have a technician's report that confirms it." "I adjusted settings on a system that I designed and installed," I replied. "A system that I maintained remote access to because the HOA never formally took possession of that access. Your technician cannot tell the difference between a system malfunction and a setting adjustment. Why would you adjust settings to turn off the heat right before a meeting?" Patricia demanded. "Maybe the system has a bug. Maybe it was a scheduled maintenance cycle. Maybe it was user error from someone else accessing the controls." I kept my voice level. "You are accusing me of sabotage without any actual proof." "This is ridiculous," Todd Fleming interjected. He was a heavy-set man with a beard, worked as a contractor. "Patricia, we all know this started because of that heating fine. Maybe we should just drop all of this before it gets out of hand." "The rules exist for a reason, Todd," Patricia said sharply. "If we let one person ignore them, everyone will think they can do whatever they want." "The rule does not override state law," I said. "My lawyer has already sent you a letter explaining this. Did you receive it?" Patricia's jaw tightened. "We received correspondence from an attorney claiming to represent you. The board will review it and respond appropriately." "So you are going to ignore it," I said flatly. "We are going to consult with our own attorney," Robert Green said. He was younger than the others, maybe late 30s, worked in insurance. "We are not going to be bullied into backing down because you hired a lawyer. This is not bullying. This is me defending myself against harassment." I looked around the room at the other homeowners. "How many of you have been fined by this board in the past year?" Slowly, hands went up. Daniel raised his. The Johnsons raised theirs. Mrs. Chen raised hers. Others followed. 12 hands out of 15 homeowners present, and how many of those fines were for things that actually mattered? I pressed. "Serious violations that affected safety or property values." The hands went down. People looked uncomfortable. "This is not appropriate for this meeting," Patricia said, her voice rising. "We are here to discuss Mr. Henderson's violations, not to litigate every board decision." "You made it about board decisions when you turned this into a witch hunt," Daniel spoke up. "Half this neighborhood is afraid to hang a picture on their front porch because you might decide it violates some obscure rule nobody has heard of." "The rules are clearly posted on the community website," Brenda Walsh said defensively. She was a blonde woman in her 50s who had barely spoken in any HOA context I had seen. "Everyone has access to them. The website has 247 pages of rules," Mrs. Chen said quietly. Her English carried a slight accent, and she usually kept to herself, which made her speaking up more impactful. I tried to read them all when I got my first fine. It took me 6 hours. Many rules contradict each other. I still do not understand what I did wrong. The meeting devolved from there. For the next hour, it became less about me and more about the accumulated grievances of the community. People who had been too intimidated to speak up individually found courage in numbers. Stories came out about fines for having the wrong color welcome mat, for parking a car in a driveway overnight instead of in the garage, for having a garden hose visible from the street. Patricia tried repeatedly to regain control, banging a gavel that she had apparently bought just for these meetings, but the room had turned against her. Even Todd and Robert looked uncomfortable with the direction things had gone. Finally, Daniel stood up and made a motion. I move that we vote to rescind all fines issued in the past year and conduct a comprehensive review of the HOA rules to remove unreasonable restrictions. That motion is out of order, Patricia said immediately. This is not a general meeting. Board decisions require a board vote. Actually, I said, pulling out my phone where I had bookmarked the HOA bylaws. Any homeowner can make a motion at any official meeting, and if it gets a second, it requires a vote of all homeowners present. It is in Section 8 of the bylaws. Patricia's face went pale. She looked at Robert, who nodded reluctantly. He is right. That is the rule. I second the motion, Mrs. Chen said. All in favor, Daniel called out. Every hand in the room went up except for Patricia and her 4 board members. 15 in favor, I counted. 5 opposed. Motion carries. This is not binding, Patricia said, but her voice had lost its confidence. The board still has final authority over fine enforcement. The homeowners have spoken, I said. If the board ignores this vote, every single person in this room can file a complaint with the Colorado HOA office for violation of governing document procedures. You want to fight all of us. The meeting ended shortly after that, with Patricia storming out and her board members trailing behind looking shell-shocked. The remaining homeowners stood around talking in small groups, and several came up to thank me for standing up to Patricia. You should run for president, Mrs. Johnson said. She was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes. We need someone reasonable in charge. I will think about it, I said, though I was already mentally drafting a campaign strategy. Over the next week, things moved quickly. David sent a follow-up letter to the HOA demanding compliance with the homeowner vote to rescind the fines. Patricia sent back a response claiming the vote was non-binding and that the board maintained full authority over enforcement decisions. David then filed a formal complaint with the Colorado Division of Real Estate, which oversaw HOA regulations in the state. Meanwhile, I started talking to neighbors about the board election scheduled for April. Colorado law required HOAs to hold annual elections, and board positions were staggered so that some came up for re-election each year. This year, 3 of the 5 seats were up: Patricia's president's seat, Susan's treasurer's seat, and Todd's member-at-large seat. I announced my candidacy for president in an email to all homeowners. Daniel announced he would run for treasurer. A woman named Grace Williams, who lived in the next building over and had gotten fined for having kids' toys visible in her yard, announced she would run for the member-at-large position. Patricia did not take it well. The retaliation started subtly. I got a notice about my trash bins being visible from the street 3 hours after pickup time. I got a citation because there was a small crack in my driveway that allegedly violated maintenance standards. I got a formal warning about noise violations for having friends over on a Friday night, despite the fact that we were inside watching movies at a normal volume. Every notice came certified mail, which cost the HOA money but also meant I had to sign for them. It was petty harassment, and it was obvious to everyone what was happening. Then Patricia made a mistake. She sent an email to all homeowners warning them about the radical candidates trying to destroy community standards. In the email, she specifically called me unstable and vindictive, said Daniel was clearly incompetent with finances despite his banking job, and claimed Grace was too young and inexperienced to understand property management. The email was defamatory, and it violated Colorado election laws that prohibited HOA boards from using community resources to campaign against candidates. David had a field day with it. He sent a cease and desist letter and amended our complaint with the state to include the email as evidence of board misconduct. The State Division responded faster than I expected. 3 weeks after our initial complaint, an investigator named Jennifer Kozlowski called me to schedule an interview. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had worked in HOA regulation for over a decade. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Denver, and I brought every document I had. The original heating fine, the sabotage accusations, the email Patricia sent, and the vote from the emergency meeting. "This is pretty clear-cut," Jennifer said after reviewing everything. "The board has violated multiple regulations. The heating fine violates habitability standards. The defamatory email violates election rules. The refusal to honor the homeowner vote violates your governing documents." She looked up at me. "Why did not you call us sooner?" "I was trying to handle it privately," I admitted. "I did not realize how bad it had gotten until other homeowners started sharing their experiences." "HOAs often spiral like this," she said. "One person gets a little authority and starts power tripping. Nobody pushes back because they do not want the hassle, so the behavior gets worse. Eventually, you get situations like this where the entire community is being held hostage by a board that has forgotten its purpose. What happens now? I am going to conduct a full investigation. I will interview other homeowners, review the board's financial records and meeting minutes, and determine the extent of the violations. If I find what I think I am going to find, the state can impose sanctions, mandatory board training, or in extreme cases, remove board members and appoint temporary oversight. How long does that take? Could be a few weeks, could be a few months. Depends on how cooperative the board is. She packed up her documents. In the meantime, keep documenting everything. Every fine, every interaction, every email. The more evidence we have, the stronger the case. I left that meeting feeling better than I had in weeks. The state was taking this seriously, which meant Patricia's reign of terror might finally be ending. The election was scheduled for April 15th, which gave us about 8 weeks to campaign. In a normal HOA election, nobody would really care. People would vote for whoever seemed reasonable, or they would not vote at all, and incumbents would win by default. But this was not a normal election. This had become a referendum on Patricia's leadership, and people were engaged. I created a simple platform: reasonable rules fairly enforced, transparent financial management, and community building instead of community policing. Daniel focused his treasurer campaign on financial transparency and stopping the waste of HOA funds on petty fine enforcement. Grace emphasized creating a welcoming environment for families. Patricia's campaign was defensive. She sent multiple emails about maintaining standards and property values. She warned that if we won, the community would descend into chaos with dead lawns and houses painted purple. It was fear-mongering, and most people saw through it. The state investigator continued her work throughout February and March. I saw her at the community building several times, meeting with different board members and reviewing records. She interviewed me twice more, asking detailed questions about specific incidents and the board's financial practices. In mid-March, Jennifer called me with news. "We have found significant violations," she said. "The board has been using HOA funds inappropriately. There is no documentation for several large expenditures, and the fine enforcement has been discriminatory. We are preparing a formal report with recommendations." "What kind of inappropriate expenditures?" I asked. "I cannot give you specifics yet, but let me say that the investigation has expanded beyond HOA misconduct into potential criminal conduct. I have referred certain findings to local law enforcement." That was not what I had expected. Criminal conduct. Like what? I cannot say more right now. Just know that the situation is being taken very seriously at multiple levels. I hung up feeling uneasy. What had Patricia been doing with HOA money? The answer came 2 weeks later, 3 weeks before the election. I was at work when Daniel called me, his voice excited. "Turn on the news," he said. "Channel 7, right now." I pulled up the live stream on my computer. The headline read, "HOA President Arrested for Embezzlement." My stomach dropped as I watched the footage of Patricia being led out of her home in handcuffs by Denver police. The news anchor explained that Patricia Summers, president of the Meadowbrook Commons HOA, had been arrested on charges of embezzling over $60,000 in HOA funds over a 2-year period. According to the report, the state investigation had uncovered a pattern of fake invoices and unauthorized transfers from the HOA accounts to Patricia's personal accounts. She had been billing the HOA for services that were never rendered, using fake vendor companies she had created. The excessive fines she had been levying on homeowners were partly to replenish the HOA accounts she had been draining. The news showed footage of the community building, interviewed several neighbors who expressed shock, and mentioned that the state was working with the remaining board members to ensure proper oversight during the transition period. My phone started ringing nonstop. Neighbors calling to ask if I had known, reporters wanting comments, David calling to congratulate me on the investigation results. I ignored most of the calls and just sat there processing the information. Patricia had not just been a petty tyrant. She had been stealing from all of us, systematically for years. The heating fine, the harassment, the retaliation, it had all been part of a larger pattern of corruption. She had been using the aggressive fine enforcement to create fear and distraction while she embezzled funds. The next few days were chaotic. The remaining board members, Todd, Susan, Brenda, and Robert, held an emergency meeting and announced they were resigning immediately. They claimed they had no knowledge of Patricia's embezzlement, which the state investigation seemed to confirm. They had been rubber stamps for her decisions, but not active participants in the fraud. The state appointed a temporary administrator to manage HOA affairs until the election. Her name was Michelle Torres, and she was a professional property manager with 20 years of experience. She immediately suspended all pending fines, launched a review of all HOA expenditures, and scheduled a special meeting to address community concerns. That meeting happened on a Thursday evening, and nearly every homeowner showed up. Michelle explained that the state was working to recover the embezzled funds, but it would take time. Patricia had apparently spent most of the money on personal expenses, vacations, renovations to her home, and luxury purchases. She had been living well beyond her means, and the HOA money had funded her lifestyle. "Will we have to pay special assessments to cover the missing money?" someone asked. "We are exploring all options," Michelle said. "The HOA has insurance that may cover some of the loss. We are also pursuing criminal restitution as part of the prosecution." It is too early to say definitively, but we are going to do everything we can to minimize the financial impact on homeowners. The election still happened as scheduled on April 15th. With Patricia in jail awaiting trial and the old board having resigned, the election became less contentious and more about rebuilding. I ran unopposed for president. Daniel and Grace won their positions easily. We brought in 2 other homeowners to fill the remaining board seats. Michael Harrison, a retired accountant who volunteered to help clean up the financial mess, and Lisa Monroe, a teacher who wanted to focus on community activities. My first official act as HOA president was to rescind every fine that had been issued in the past 2 years. We sent letters to all affected homeowners informing them that the fines were void and that any money already paid would be refunded once the financial situation was resolved. My second act was to form a rules committee to review all HOA regulations and eliminate anything that was petty, unenforceable, or unreasonable. We cut the rulebook from 247 pages down to 38. We kept rules that actually mattered, things related to safety, maintenance standards that preserved property values, and noise regulations that had specific decibel limits and enforcement procedures. We eliminated subjective rules about decorations, restrictions on parking in driveways, and anything that gave the board excessive authority to fine people for trivial matters. The third thing we did was implement financial transparency. Every HOA expenditure over $500 now required approval from at least 3 board members and was posted on the community website. We hired an independent accounting firm to conduct quarterly audits. We created a reserve fund with clear guidelines for what it could be used for. Throughout this process, Michelle Torres was invaluable. She guided us through proper procedures, helped us understand our legal obligations, and connected us with resources. By the time her temporary appointment ended in June, we had a functional, transparent, reasonable HOA board in place. Patricia's criminal trial happened in July. I attended the sentencing hearing along with several other homeowners. She pleaded guilty to embezzlement and theft charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. The prosecutor explained that Patricia had stolen exactly $63,400 over 26 months. She had created shell companies with names like Meadowbrook Landscaping Services and Commons Maintenance Solutions, and billed the HOA for work that was never performed. She had been surprisingly sophisticated about it, creating fake invoices and documentation that looked legitimate at first glance. The judge was not sympathetic. He sentenced Patricia to 4 years in prison and ordered her to pay full restitution plus penalties and interest. Her husband, who apparently had no knowledge of the embezzlement, filed for divorce within a month of her arrest. Their house in the community went into foreclosure when Patricia could not make the mortgage payments from jail. The insurance eventually covered $40,000 of the stolen money. Patricia's restitution payments would cover the rest over time, though we were not holding our breath for quick repayment. To make up the shortfall in the HOA budget, we refinanced some community maintenance projects, negotiated better rates with vendors, and implemented voluntary fundraising events. We managed to avoid special assessments, which was a relief to everyone. By August, life in Meadowbrook Commons had settled into a new normal. The community building hosted family movie nights and potluck dinners instead of contentious board meetings. Kids played in the common areas without fear of generating noise violation complaints. People decorated their porches and yards with personality instead of worrying about obscure rule violations. I kept my position as HOA president, though it was nothing like I had imagined when I first considered running. Instead of being about enforcement and fines, it became about actual community management. We organized neighborhood cleanup days, planned social events, negotiated bulk rate discounts with local services, and handled legitimate maintenance issues. It was work, but it was satisfying work. The heating fine that had started everything became something of a legend in the community. New residents would hear the story and laugh in disbelief. The fact that a $200 fine for running a heater in winter had ultimately led to uncovering $60,000 in embezzlement, and transforming the entire HOA became a cautionary tale about standing up to unreasonable authority. David, my lawyer, eventually sent me a bill for his services. It was substantial but fair. I paid it gladly, considering that his involvement had been crucial in escalating the situation to state authorities who could actually investigate properly. He also helped us draft new bylaws and governing documents that protected homeowners from future board overreach. One Saturday morning in September, I was doing yard work when Mrs. Chen walked by with her corgi. She stopped to chat, something she never would have done during Patricia's reign. "The community is so different now," she said, smiling. "I was thinking about selling my home last year because of all the stress. Now I am planning to stay." "I am glad," I said sincerely. "That is what an HOA should be about, making people want to stay, not driving them away." She nodded. "You did a good thing, standing up to her. Many of us were too afraid." After she left, I thought about that. I had not set out to be a hero or a reformer. I had just been angry about an unjust fine and responded in a petty way by turning off the heat to their meeting. But that petty act of rebellion had opened a door, given other people courage to speak up, and ultimately exposed serious corruption. The HVAC system in the community building still worked perfectly, maintained now by a professional service that we paid fairly for quarterly maintenance. I had transferred all my remote access and documentation to the HOA officially, putting everything in writing this time. I kept the app on my phone, though, just for monitoring purposes, and sometimes I would check it to make sure temperatures were stable. On cold winter nights, when I ran my heater as high as I wanted without fear of fines, I sometimes thought about that moment when Patricia had handed me that first citation. How angry I had been. How I had made a split-second decision to hit back in the only way I could think of. I never expected that turning off the heat to a meeting room would end with an HOA president going to prison. But that was the thing about standing up to bullies and corrupt authority. You never knew what you might uncover once you started pushing back. The community thrived in ways that had nothing to do with strict rule enforcement. Property values actually increased, not because we fined people for minor violations, but because people took pride in their homes and the neighborhood. When people feel welcome and respected, they invest in their community. When they feel harassed and watched, they do the minimum required and plan their escape. We learned that lesson the hard way, or rather, Patricia taught us that lesson through her negative example. By December, almost a full year after that first heating fine, we held our annual holiday party in the community building. The heat worked perfectly, keeping everyone warm while a snowstorm raged outside. Kids played games in one corner while adults chatted and ate potluck food. It was the kind of community gathering that HOAs were supposed to facilitate. Daniel came up to me holding a cup of hot chocolate. "You ever miss the drama?" he asked with a grin. "Not even a little bit," I said honestly. "Turns out boring HOA management is exactly what everyone wanted all along." "Who would have thought?" he laughed. I looked around the room at neighbors who had become genuine friends through this experience, at kids who could play without generating complaints, at a community that felt like a community instead of a police state. It had all started with me being petty about a heater. Sometimes pettiness, when directed at injustice, becomes something more. It becomes resistance. It becomes the first crack in a corrupt system. It becomes the catalyst for change. I turned my attention back to the party, back to the simple pleasure of warm building on a cold night, and smiled. Sometimes the smallest acts of defiance lead to the biggest transformations. You just have to be willing to turn off the heat and see what happens next. The legal proceedings continued into the new year, with Patricia's restitution payments starting to trickle in. The community received its first payment in January, a modest $200 that barely made a dent in what was owed. But it was something, a small acknowledgement that justice, however slow, was being served. I continued as HOA president through that year and the next, eventually training a successor when I felt the community was stable enough. The new president was a woman named Sandra Diaz, who had moved into the community just before everything imploded with Patricia. She brought fresh energy and ideas, and I was happy to pass the responsibility to someone who wanted it. My townhome remained my home, but it felt different now. It was not just a place I lived, but part of a community I had helped rebuild. The heater ran whenever I wanted it to, a small daily reminder of where this had all started. Years later, when people ask me about my time as HOA president, I always told them the same thing. An HOA should serve its community, not rule over it. The moment a board forgets that distinction, the moment leaders start seeing themselves as enforcers rather than facilitators, that is when everything goes wrong. And if you ever get an unjust fine for heating your home in winter, do not just pay it. Question it. Fight it. Turn off their meeting room heat if you have to, because sometimes the only way to fix a broken system is to stop enabling it, even in small ways. The community building still stood at the center of Meadowbrook Commons, its heating system humming efficiently through each winter. I made sure of that, not out of spite anymore, but out of care, because that building represented something larger than just a meeting space. It represented the idea that communities could govern themselves fairly, that power could be wielded responsibly, and that standing up to corruption, no matter how petty the initial grievance, could lead to meaningful change. I kept that first heating fine framed on my wall, a reminder of the absurdity that started everything. $200 for trying to stay warm. It seemed almost laughable now, given everything that had happened afterward. But it had been real at the time, a genuine injustice that sparked a justified anger. The last time I checked on Patricia, she was serving her sentence at a minimum security facility in Colorado, working in the prison library and attending financial crime rehabilitation programs. Her story had become a case study in HOA fraud, used by the state in training sessions for new HOA boards about the warning signs of corruption. As for me, I went back to being just another homeowner in a functional community association. I showed up to meetings occasionally, voted on important issues, and lived my life without fear of arbitrary fines. It was exactly what I had wanted from the beginning, nothing more and nothing less. The snow fell outside my window as I sat in my living room, the heat set comfortably at 72 degrees. I had earned that comfort, fought for it in ways I never expected when I first bought this place. And every time I adjusted that thermostat, I remembered that sometimes the smallest acts of resistance matter most, because in the end, it was not about the heater or the fine or even the embezzlement. It was about people refusing to accept unreasonable authority. It was about communities remembering that they had power when they stood together. It was about the simple truth that bullies, whether they wear HOA badges or not, only win when good people stay silent. I did not stay silent. I turned off the heat to a meeting room, and that small act of defiance changed everything. Not because I was brave or special, but because I was fed up and willing to push back. Sometimes that is all it takes to start a revolution, one thermostat at a time.